You can't park that there. That's my yacht, she screeched before the sun even cleared the horizon, her voice bouncing across the glassy marina like a gull in distress. I looked up from my coffee on the upper deck, watching a woman in oversized sunglasses and floral prints storm toward the pier like she owned the ocean. Behind her, 2 men in matching polo shirts carried wine crates, and a small crowd of her friends followed, filming everything on their phones as if this was some grand resort spectacle. My duck hand froze mid-step, clearly torn between professionalism and disbelief. Karen, as she later introduced herself, jabbed her manicured finger toward my yacht, a 40-foot silver beauty named Horizon Tide, and announced she had reserved it for her HOA's executive sunset cruise. I didn't say a word. I just let her dig her hole while I sipped my coffee and watched the chaos brew. It was one of those mornings that start normal and turn into a movie before breakfast. The marina smelled of salt and diesel, the air thick with seagull cries and the soft slap of waves against the hulls. I owned every dock, every slip, every square inch of that floating empire, but I didn't look the part. I wore an old gray t-shirt, jeans, and sunglasses, the kind of outfit that made people assume I was another maintenance guy. That's why I didn't interrupt her performance. She strutted to the dock office like she was about to host a red carpet event, barking orders about champagne coolers and Instagram-worthy lighting. My dockmaster, Daniel, tried to explain there was no reservation under her name, but Karen was having none of it. She waved a crumpled email at him, an email that, upon closer inspection, was just an HOA meeting reminder with Marina Party scribbled in pen at the top. "It's all confirmed," she snapped. "I'm not standing here for this incompetence." Daniel shot me a helpless look, and I gave him a subtle nod to let her carry on. Her entourage unloaded trays of catered appetizers onto my deck as if they were setting up for a royal banquet. The ridiculous part was how confident she was, how certain that authority could be claimed with volume alone. I noticed her phone wallpaper, her face posing beside a Karen for HOA President banner, and I suddenly understood everything. She was one of those. A queen of cul-de-sacs who believed property lines were drawn in her favor by divine decree. Daniel tried again. "This yacht is privately owned." She gave a sharp laugh that sounded like a blender full of ice. "Privately owned? Sweetheart, everything in this marina is public use. I know the county bylaws. You can't just hoard yachts for yourself." She then turned toward me, mistaking me for a dockhand. "You help us with the catering table. And make sure there's an outlet for our sound system. The band's coming at noon." The band. I bit back a smile and took another sip. Behind her, her friends were already arguing about who would get the captain photo for their social feed. Karen's voice carried over the water as she berated Daniel again, claiming the HOA had jurisdiction because her community technically overlooked the marina from the hill. "That makes this our recreational annex," she declared. "And since our fees contribute to county beautification, we're entitled to its facilities." It was a masterpiece of delusion. Her words piled higher than the champagne bottles clinking behind her. Daniel's patience thinned by the second, but I stayed silent, pretending to check mooring lines. Every now and then I caught snippets of her friends whispering about how exclusive this place was, how lucky they were to have a connection. Karen basked in their attention, flipping her hair like a talk show guest explaining how she saved the neighborhood from unruly lawn ornaments. When she tried to board the yacht, though, the motion sensor chimed softly, and a mechanical voice echoed, "Unauthorized access detected." She froze, her stiletto heel hovering mid-air. "What's that supposed to mean?" she demanded. I calmly stepped closer, still pretending to be some oblivious worker. "Probably means the owner's system doesn't recognize your reservation." She scoffed. "Oh, please. I've handled bigger misunderstandings. Call whoever's in charge. I'm sure they'll clear this up once they know who I am." I almost lost it right there. The Audacity had its own gravitational pull. As the morning crowd gathered along the docks, fishermen, tourists, and a few regular boat owners, Karen seemed to thrive on the attention. She started giving a speech about community access rights and public equality while her friends live-streamed her fight for fairness. A young couple filming nearby whispered, "Is she seriously hijacking someone's yacht?" And I could feel a ripple of laughter travel down the pier. Karen mistook it for support and grew louder. "You all pay taxes," she cried. "You all deserve access to these waters, not just the rich elite who think they can fence off the ocean." I leaned against a post, amused at how far she was willing to go without realizing whose waters she was standing on. Then came the first real twist. A black pickup truck rolled up beside the office, and out stepped two Marina security officers, big guys in navy polos with badges stitched on their sleeves. Karen spun toward them and waved dramatically. "Finally! Someone sensible. Please remove this staff member," she pointed at Daniel, "for obstructing my lawful event." The taller guard raised an eyebrow. "Lawful event?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "We have a reservation under the HOA's recreational committee. Now, please escort this man off the property." The shorter guard turned to Daniel, who simply looked at me. I gave a subtle nod again. "Actually," Daniel said, struggling not to grin, "you might want to talk to him." He pointed at me. Karen squinted, as if trying to remember where she'd seen me. Maybe she thought I was some mid-level employee or a guy who handled fuel deliveries. "You," she said. "Tell your boss we're not leaving until we get our cruise." I smiled. "Don't worry," I said calmly. "You'll get your cruise, one way or another." She didn't notice the double meaning. She turned back to her group, triumphant, assuming she'd just intimidated another dockhand into submission. But her friends began to sense something off. A few stepped back as the guards whispered to each other, and I quietly motioned for Daniel to activate the internal log system. Cameras clicked on across the dock, red lights glowing like tiny eyes. By the time the Coast Guard boat idled nearby, routine inspection, though perfectly timed, the tension had wrapped around the entire marina like a live wire. Karen tried to wave them off, shouting that the press was already covering her HOA event. Her friends recorded everything, their excitement fading into nervous laughter. And as I stood there with my half-finished coffee, I couldn't help but marvel at how predictably the morning had unfolded. The self-proclaimed HOA queen had marched into my empire, claimed my yacht, insulted my staff, and invited half her neighborhood to witness her triumph, without the faintest clue that the quiet man she'd been ordering around since sunrise owned the marina, the yacht, and every floating inch she stood upon. And that realization, when it finally came, would hit harder than the tide that slapped the docks below. The sun climbed higher, spreading gold across the water while Karen's so-called executive crew turned the pier into a scene of pure absurdity. She stood with a clipboard now, barking orders at her entourage as if she were coordinating a naval parade. "Nancy, make sure the appetizers are displayed properly. And someone fix the tablecloth, it's wrinkled," she shouted, waving her hand toward the yacht that still refused to grant them entry. Her voice cut through the air like a siren, making the fishermen on the opposite dock look up from their nets. The marina had turned into a stage, and she was the star of a play no one had paid to see. I leaned against a piling, sipping what was left of my now lukewarm coffee, trying to decide how long I should let this circus continue before stepping in. There was a special kind of entertainment in watching someone so convinced of their own authority implode without any help. Daniel returned from the office holding a clipboard of his own, trying to look professional even though I could tell he was seconds from laughing. He said carefully, "As I mentioned earlier, we don't have any record of your reservation. And you can't bring outside food or beverages without clearance." Karen rolled her eyes dramatically, the kind of gesture that probably got her elected HOA president by intimidation alone. "That's nonsense," she said. "This marina is under county jurisdiction, and the HOA has equal authority to coordinate public events here. I've already spoken to the council about our right to use it." Daniel blinked slowly, taking a deep breath before replying. "The marina isn't public property," he said. "It's privately owned." She smirked. "Then perhaps you should tell the owner that their property is about to host an event that benefits the community. I'm sure they'd appreciate some positive publicity." She said it so confidently that the onlookers started murmuring, wondering if she might actually have a point. That was her power, confidence without consequence. At least, not yet. Behind her, her friends continued setting up as if they were at a country club. One of them plugged in a small speaker and played a soft pop tune that echoed over the water, while another arranged flowers in glass vases on my dock table. I had to admit, their coordination was impressive, if only it wasn't trespassing. The scent of expensive perfume mixed with salt air, and I noticed several nearby yacht owners peeking out from their cabins to see what was going on. Some recognized Karen immediately, whispering to each other. She had a reputation even beyond her neighborhood, stories about noise complaints, demands for paint color approvals, and her campaign to ban unsightly boats from the lakefront. The irony was now poetic. At that moment, her phone rang, and she answered on speaker, pacing dramatically up and down the dock. "Yes, Janice, it's all going beautifully," she said. "The Marina staff tried to give us trouble, but I straightened it out. We're about to board now." She winked at Daniel, who looked like he wanted to crawl into the ocean. "Yes, the yacht's gorgeous, silver, sleek, perfect for our sunset gala. Of course, I'm handling it personally." She hung up and turned to the crowd. "Now, everyone, let's keep this area tidy. The news might stop by for coverage, and we need to represent the HOA with class." The audacity was almost admirable. She acted as if she were orchestrating a televised charity event rather than illegally boarding a multimillion-dollar vessel. I caught Daniel's eye and gave him a subtle sign to stand down for now. I wanted her to keep going, to tie her own knot before I pulled the rope. Watching her give fake interviews to her friends pretending to be reporters was something I wouldn't forget for a long time. One of her companions, a man with a camera vest, asked mock questions while she delivered grand answers about responsible marina use and the importance of community unity. The camera panned toward the yacht behind her, and I almost laughed thinking how this footage would look later when the truth came out. The script she was writing for herself was already doomed. Just when things seemed to be calming down, she decided to escalate again. "All right," she announced, "we're boarding. The owner clearly isn't showing up, so we'll consider this vessel a donation for today's event." Her group cheered as if she'd just won a lawsuit. Daniel stepped forward quickly, blocking the walkway. "You can't do that," he said firmly. "This is private property, and trespassing on a yacht is a serious offense." Karen folded her arms, towering over him despite being half his height. "Oh, please. What's the worst that can happen? A fine? The HOA's legal team will handle it. You're wasting my time." She pushed past him, her heel clicking against the metal ramp, and reached for the gate. The security system beeped again, this time louder. "Unauthorized access attempt recorded," the automated voice repeated, and the small red light on the lock began flashing. She turned to glare at Daniel. "Well, open it," she ordered. "Do your job." That was when one of her friends leaned close and whispered something to her. I could see her expression falter for the first time. "Wait," she said softly, "did you say cameras?" The woman nodded. Karen straightened her posture again, trying to hide her hesitation. "Good," she said. "That means they'll capture the discrimination we're facing here." She pulled out her phone and started filming herself. It's 2025, and yet here I am, being denied access to a public marina because of bureaucratic nonsense. My HOA works tirelessly to improve this community, and this is how we're treated? Unacceptable. Her voice rose with each sentence, echoing across the docks. I saw several heads turning, people watching from nearby yachts, some recording quietly, others shaking their heads. Then she turned her camera toward me. "This man here," she said, pointing directly at me, "refused to help us. He's complicit in this harassment." I blinked slowly, pretending to look confused. "I was just checking the lines," I said calmly. "But go ahead. Keep filming." She sneered. "Oh, I will. And when this video hits social media, people will know exactly how you treat tax-paying residents." Behind her, the security officers had stopped pretending to be patient. They stepped forward, their radios crackling softly. One of them said, "We need to ask you and your group to leave the dock area until this situation is verified." Karen's jaw dropped. "Excuse me? You can't remove me. I'm the guest of honor." Her group murmured uncertainly, realizing for the first time that maybe she wasn't in control. Daniel stepped closer to me and whispered under his breath, "Should I call the sheriff?" I shook my head. "Not yet," I said quietly. "Let's give her a few more minutes." I wanted the timing perfect. There's a certain satisfaction in watching arrogance unravel naturally, like a storm losing its own wind. Karen, meanwhile, was lecturing the guards about civil rights and unlawful exclusion. Her words grew louder, her movements sharper, until one of the flower vases she'd brought toppled over and shattered. The sound startled everyone, and she froze for a second, realizing the crowd's mood had shifted. For a brief moment, the only sound was the water slapping gently against the pier. Then she turned back to her audience, forcing a smile. "Accidents happen," she said cheerfully, though her voice. By noon the marina was no longer a peaceful stretch of sunlight and gentle tides. It had become a stage where arrogance performed its final act. Karen's guests, dressed like they were attending a yacht club gala rather than trespassing, had begun to grow restless. Some fanned themselves with brochures they had taken from the marina office, others complained about the heat, and a few quietly questioned whether Karen actually had permission to be there. She ignored them, pacing along the dock with her phone glued to her ear, pretending to be in a heated conversation with county officials. Every sentence she spoke was calculated for her audience. "Yes, I'm here right now," she said loudly. "And yes, the marina management is being incredibly uncooperative. I'm escalating this to the regional HOA council." Her voice carried across the water, bouncing between yachts. She had no idea that every word was being recorded by my dock security system, cameras quietly observing her self-destruction from every angle. Daniel was in the office coordinating with the Coast Guard about the growing disturbance, while I stayed near the pier, pretending to adjust ropes. The yacht glistened in the sun, immaculate and untouchable, its reflection shimmering like a mirror that refused to acknowledge her. Karen's confidence began to flicker as time passed and no miracle authority came to her rescue. She adjusted her sunglasses, glanced at me, and smirked. "Well," she said in a tone thick with sarcasm, "I suppose you're enjoying this little power trip. Do you always treat guests this way?" I looked at her calmly. "You're not a guest," I said quietly. "You're trespassing." The way her jaw tightened told me she wasn't used to hearing that word directed at her. "Trespassing?" she repeated with an incredulous laugh. "You really think that matters? I've organized events for half the county. I know everyone worth knowing. You're just a dockhand trying to play tough." She turned back to her group with an exaggerated shrug. "Typical," she said. "Petty men trying to flex over hard-working women. Classic." The women around her nodded nervously, unwilling to challenge her. Just then, a low hum echoed across the water as a white Coast Guard boat approached the outer dock. Its lights weren't flashing, but the mere presence of authority sent a ripple through the crowd. Karen's posture straightened, and she suddenly smiled like a politician caught off guard but determined to spin it. "Perfect timing," she said. "They'll clear this up." As the boat docked, two officers stepped out, their uniforms crisp and their expressions neutral. One of them approached Daniel, who had just returned with the security team. Karen wasted no time rushing forward. "Officers," she said with theatrical urgency, "thank goodness you're here. I'm dealing with some very unprofessional staff. We have a reservation for this yacht under the HOA, and they are trying to block our community event." The officer looked at her calmly. Do you have documentation of that reservation?" Karen smiled tightly and held up her phone. "I have an email," she said. The officer took one glance at the screen and frowned. "This appears to be a meeting reminder," he said. "Not a rental agreement." Karen laughed nervously. "Well, yes, that's the preliminary paperwork. The marina management was supposed to handle the rest." The officer looked around. "Which member of marina management are you referring to?" Daniel pointed at me silently, but before I could even open my mouth, Karen spoke over him. Him, she said, jabbing a finger toward Daniel instead. He's been obstructing us since we arrived. Completely disrespectful. The officer turned his gaze toward me. And you are? He asked. I smiled slightly. Just observing, I said. The owner will be here shortly. Karen crossed her arms. I hope he's more reasonable than his employees, she said. Her arrogance was beginning to sound like desperation. The officer nodded, then turned to Daniel. Sir, if the property is private and there's no agreement, you have every right to ask them to leave. Karen's smile vanished. What? She snapped. You're just going to take their word for it? This is a public marina. The officer looked at her evenly. This is a privately owned facility. I've been here before. I know the owner personally. That hit her like a slap. For a brief second, her face froze, and I could see the exact moment she realized she might have walked into a storm she couldn't control. Her entourage started to whisper nervously now. One of her friends, a man in a sun hat, asked, Karen, maybe we should just wait somewhere else until you sort this out. She snapped at him without hesitation. No, we're not leaving. Do you know how ridiculous that would look? They're trying to embarrass me. She turned back toward the officer, regaining her performative confidence. I'm not going anywhere until I speak to this so-called owner. The officer sighed, clearly done with the theatrics. He's here, he said simply. Her head swiveled toward me, confusion flashing across her face. What do you mean? The officer gestured casually toward me. This gentleman. He owns the marina. It was a beautiful moment, silence thick enough to hear the wind brushing against the flags. Her expression changed from disbelief to sheer panic. Him? She whispered, her voice cracking. Her friends looked between us, realization dawning on them. You own this place? One of them asked, astonished. I nodded. Every dock, every slip, every yacht stored here, I said. Including that one. Karen blinked rapidly, trying to find words. That's impossible, she said. You're dressed like a worker. I finished for her. That's the point. You learn a lot about people when they think you're beneath them. A nervous laugh rippled through the watching crowd. Even the Coast Guard officer cracked a faint smile. Karen's face flushed deep red. This is ridiculous, she said. You can't. She struggled to find control again. Fine, she said finally, straightening her blazer. Then I'd like to rent the yacht officially. Name your price. I shook my head slowly. It's not for rent, And after today, neither is the dock space you're standing on. Her jaw dropped. You can't ban me. This isn't your personal kingdom. I smiled faintly. Actually, it is. Her friends started packing up their things quietly, pretending to be busy. One of them whispered, Karen, let's just go, but she ignored them. She was too far gone to retreat gracefully. This is going on record, she declared. I'll sue you for discrimination, for harassment, for defamation. The officer cut her off. That's enough. You're trespassing on private property. If you don't leave voluntarily, we'll have to escort you out. For a moment, she stood there frozen, her pride at war with reality. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger now, boat owners, fishermen, tourists, all watching as the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA faced her reckoning. She scanned their faces and saw no sympathy, only mild amusement. The cornered look in her eyes reminded me of every person who thought authority could substitute for respect. This isn't over, she hissed finally. I'll be back, and when I am, you'll regret humiliating me. I nodded calmly. I'm sure, I said. But next time, try making a reservation first. The officer motioned toward the parking area. Please, he said. Let's not make this worse. The following morning came with a thick fog over the marina, a quiet gray haze that softened the world and muffled sound. I stood on the deck of Horizon Tide with a cup of hot coffee, staring at the water that looked more like smoke than sea. Daniel was already making his rounds, tightening lines and checking security logs, but even through the calm, there was a tension hanging in the air like the scent of an approaching storm. He looked up at me and said, "You think she's coming back?" I didn't even hesitate. "People like her always come back," I said. "They can't stand losing on their own stage." He nodded grimly. By mid-morning, his prediction proved right. A white SUV pulled into the lot, followed by a convoy of luxury sedans. Karen stepped out first, dressed in a power suit far too formal for a Marina, holding a folder thick enough to make a lawyer sweat. Behind her came a man in a blue tie carrying a briefcase, and two others who looked like they'd been dragged into this out of obligation. She wasn't done, she was doubling down. The guards exchanged wary glances as she strutted toward the dock, her heels clacking like war drums. She didn't yell this time, at least not yet. Instead, she wore that dangerous kind of calm, the calm that comes when someone believes they've found a way to turn the tables. She stopped just short of the security gate and announced to no one in particular, "I'm here to meet with the Marina's management regarding a formal complaint and inspection." Daniel met her halfway, his expression polite but firm. "Good morning," he said. "Do you have an appointment?" She smiled like a shark showing teeth. "You'll find my name on the county list for authorized site evaluations. We received several complaints about code violations here." Daniel blinked. "Complaints?" he repeated. "From who?" She tilted her head. "Anonymous sources," she said sweetly. "We take every report seriously." I nearly laughed out loud. She had actually filed a fake complaint to gain access. This was beyond persistence, it was obsession. I watched from a distance as she began pointing out random things, an uneven plank on the dock, a small rust mark on the railing, a loose cable coiled neatly beside a cleat, and declared each one a potential hazard. Her so-called inspectors nodded dutifully, jotting notes on their clipboards. "See," she said, "this Marina isn't up to standard. We're just doing our due diligence." Daniel crossed his arms. Those men aren't county officials," he said quietly. "I know who the real inspectors are." Her smile tightened. "Really? Well, maybe the county decided to expand their team. You don't know everything." The man with the briefcase cleared his throat nervously and whispered something to her, but she waved him off. "Let me handle this," she hissed. I could see her confidence wobbling just a bit, like a tower leaning in the wind. She was improvising now, and improvisation never went well for people who built their authority on bluffing. I decided it was time to step in. I walked down the dock slowly, every footstep deliberate, the kind of quiet stride that draws attention without trying. The sound of gulls filled the pause between us. When I reached her, she turned with a bright, fake smile. "Ah, the owner," she said, her voice dripping with false civility. "I was hoping we could speak privately. I'm here on official business." I sipped my coffee and said, "You're here on borrowed patience." Her smile twitched. "That's not very professional," she said, gesturing to her folder. "These documents outline multiple safety concerns, and until those are addressed, your Marina may be subject to closure pending review." I looked down at the folder, then back at her. "You printed that at home," I said flatly. Her eyes widened for a split second before she recovered. "Excuse me," she said. "That's a formal report." I reached out and plucked the top sheet from the folder. It was a generic PDF template she'd filled out with handwritten notes. "You misspelled maintenance 3 times, I said calmly. Her cheeks flushed crimson. Her so-called team shifted uncomfortably behind her, clearly realizing they were part of a losing battle. Daniel said, stepping forward, "If you and your associates don't leave, we'll have to contact the sheriff again." Karen's voice rose slightly, the mask cracking. "You'll do no such thing," she snapped. "We're acting under community jurisdiction. As head of the HOA, I have the right to verify any property that impacts the shared coastline." I smiled faintly. "This coastline hasn't been shared since 1978, I said. "It's federally leased land, privately managed, and fully under my company's ownership." She blinked rapidly, trying to process the words. That's impossible, she said. You can't own water. No, I said, but I own the docks that touch it. Which means right now, you're standing on my property again. For a moment, she was speechless. The man with the briefcase finally found his voice. He murmured, perhaps we should. No, she interrupted. We're not leaving. His bluffing. I looked at her quietly for a long second and then said, fine. Let's make it official. I nodded to Daniel, who tapped his radio and called the sheriff's office on an open channel. Within minutes, a patrol car rolled up to the lot, lights flashing softly in the mist. Karen's composure cracked for real this time. You called them again, she demanded. You can't keep harassing me like this. I said nothing. The sheriff stepped out, a tall, broad man in mirrored sunglasses, and smiled when he saw me. Morning, he said. You again? Seems like it, I replied. He turned to Karen. We've already discussed this property yesterday, he said. I thought we were clear. Karen's voice trembled between outrage and panic. Sheriff, he's operating without proper safety inspections. I have proof right here. She thrust the folder toward him. He flipped it open, scanned a page, and then sighed. He said, this is a printout from a home printer. You even left the website watermark at the bottom. Her hand dropped to her side as laughter rippled quietly through the watching Marina staff. I could have you arrested for filing false reports, he added. You're lucky he hasn't pressed trespassing charges yet. Her eyes darted to me, filled with hatred and disbelief. You're doing this to humiliate me, she said. I shook my head. No, I said calmly. You're doing that all on your own. The sheriff motioned to his deputy. Escort them back to their vehicles, he said. If they return again without cause, we'll proceed formally. Karen's entourage began to retreat, muttering among themselves, but she stayed frozen in place, staring at me like a general surveying a lost battlefield. You think this is over? She said, her voice low and cold. You think you've won? I shrugged. There's nothing to win, I said. You tried to take what wasn't yours. That's all this ever was. Her expression twisted, but she said nothing more. She turned sharply on her heel and stormed back to her car, her heels clicking in perfect rhythm with her fury. Days passed quietly after that confrontation, the Marina slipping back into its rhythm like nothing had happened, but the calm never fooled me. I knew silence was only the pause before Karen's next move. She was the kind of person who could turn humiliation into obsession, and I could feel it coming in the air like electricity before a storm. Daniel joked about installing a Karen alert on the security system, but I could tell he was half serious. Every unfamiliar car that slowed near the entrance made the dockhands tense. The staff had seen enough of her chaos to know it wasn't over. Early on a Saturday morning, when the sun painted the water in streaks of pink and gold, the next act began. A group of luxury sedans rolled in, followed by 2 news vans, their satellite dishes glinting in the light. Karen stepped out in a white suit, camera-ready, flanked by a reporter with a microphone and a cameraman already filming. She had gone public. I almost laughed when I realized what she was doing. She was trying to turn this into a scandal, a narrative where she, the courageous community leader, stood up against an arrogant business owner who denied access to the people. She walked right up to the main gate, perfectly framed by the camera, and began delivering her speech with the confidence of someone who had practiced it in front of a mirror all night. We're here today, she announced, to expose the corruption and greed that prevents hard-working citizens from enjoying our shared waterfront. Her voice carried across the marina like a rehearsed sermon. A few early boat owners stopped to watch from their decks, their coffee cups frozen mid-air. This private owner, she continued, gesturing dramatically toward the docks, has hoarded public access, denied fair use, and even harassed residents who only wanted to organize community events. The cameraman panned toward me, standing quietly by the office door, and she smiled like a predator who thought she had cornered her prey. And there he is, she said. The man himself. The reporter turned toward me immediately. Sir, he said, Do you have a comment regarding the allegations? I stepped forward slowly, every step measured, the sound of my boots echoing on the dock. Karen straightened her posture, expecting me to lose my composure in front of the cameras. But I didn't. I looked at the reporter and said in a calm voice, "Absolutely. Follow me." That surprised everyone. The cameraman followed as I led them toward the Marina office, where Daniel had already queued up the security footage. Karen frowned but didn't stop filming. She probably thought she could spin whatever I showed them. Inside, I gestured to the large monitor and said, "You're about to see the truth." Daniel hit play, and the footage rolled, crystal clear images of Karen yelling, shoving her way onto private property, lying to officers, and printing fake inspection forms. Every word, every insult, every threat was right there in high definition. The room went silent except for the sound of her own voice echoing back at her from the speakers. Her confident smile cracked. "That's not the full story," she stammered. "You edited that." The reporter frowned. "The timestamps are continuous," he said quietly. The cameraman lowered his lens slightly, glancing at her uncertainly. "This footage was taken by our security system," I said. "Everything you just saw happened exactly as shown. And the sheriff's report matches it word for word." I placed a copy of the official document on the counter for them to see. Karen's eyes darted between the paper and the faces around her, realizing her trap had flipped back on her. "You're manipulating the narrative," she snapped. "You own the system, the land, and now you're trying to control the story." The irony was delicious. "No," I said. "You controlled the story until now. I'm just letting the truth speak for itself." Outside, more people had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Boat owners, staff, and even some of Karen's HOA members stood watching through the glass doors. The reporter turned off his mic, clearly uninterested in broadcasting her version anymore. Karen's voice grew shrill as she tried to reclaim control. "You think this is over?" she shouted. "You can't just embarrass me like this on camera. My HOA will, your HOA, I interrupted, was dissolved yesterday." Her eyes went wide. "What are you talking about?" I handed her another document, one signed and stamped by the county. "After the sheriff filed the incident report and your board's involvement in trespassing came to light, several members resigned. The association no longer meets quorum. You're officially no longer president of anything." The silence that followed was so sharp you could hear the flags flapping in the wind outside. She stared at the paper like it was written in another language. "No," she whispered. "They wouldn't do that to me." But they had. The same people who had followed her lead for years had finally turned on her. Word had spread through the community, and the residents who once admired her now saw her as a liability. Her grand crusade had backfired completely. The camera crew quietly packed up, muttering something about wasting airtime. One of the reporters from the second van approached me privately and said, "We'll run your side if you're comfortable on record." I nodded slightly. "Just tell the truth," I said. "That's all I want." As they left, Karen stood there frozen, her folder of fake evidence slipping from her hands and scattering across the wooden floor. Pages fluttered into the wind, the ink bleeding slightly from the moisture in the air. She knelt to grab them, her fingers trembling, her hair falling across her face. For the first time, she didn't look like a queen defending her crown. She looked small, desperate, lost. When she finally stood again, her voice was barely a whisper. "You've destroyed me," she said. "You ruined my reputation." I looked at her for a long moment before replying. "You did that yourself," I said quietly. "All I did was hold up a mirror." She stared at me, her expression shifting from anger to disbelief to something almost like sorrow, then she turned and walked away slowly, the wind tugging at her suit jacket. Daniel came up beside me and exhaled. "That was brutal," he said. "Necessary," I replied. People needed to see the truth in daylight. We stepped outside as the crowd dispersed, the air thick with murmurs and sympathy that weren't for her. One of her former HOA members approached me and said, "You handled that better than any of us could have." She's been terrorizing the neighborhood for years." I nodded politely, not gloating, just relieved it was finally ending. A week went by without a trace of Karen, and for a while I started to think the storm had finally passed. The marina returned to its calm rhythm, boats rocking gently against their lines, tourists snapping pictures of the docks, and my staff working with the kind of quiet focus that only peace allows. The air smelled like salt and varnish again instead of tension and perfume. But then the whispers started, soft at first, then louder. Daniel brought it up one afternoon as we were reviewing maintenance logs. "You should see what she's posting online," he said, sliding his phone across the counter. On the screen was a video of Karen sitting in her car, speaking directly to the camera. Her tone was calm, measured, almost pitiful. "I've been unfairly targeted," she said. "A wealthy man used his influence to silence me when all I wanted was fairness for our community." The comment section was already full of sympathy. "Stay strong, Karen," one said. "Don't let bullies win," said another. She was rebranding herself from entitled tyrant to victim of corruption. It was a clever move. Dangerous, too. I knew better than to ignore her. She wasn't the type to give up. She was rebuilding her image to strike from a different angle. The next morning, an envelope arrived addressed to the Marina office. Inside was a formal letter from her attorney, demanding a public apology and financial compensation for emotional distress caused by defamation and unlawful exposure of private footage. I handed it to my lawyer without blinking. "We'll handle this through the proper channels," he said, already drafting a response. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't trying to win in court, she was trying to win in perception. She was hoping to drag this out long enough to make herself relevant again, to make me look like a heartless businessman crushing a community woman. And that, I decided, was where I'd stop playing defense. The next day, I hosted a community open house at the marina. Flyers went out to every household in town, inviting families to tour the docks, learn about boating safety, and enjoy free refreshments on the boardwalk. Daniel thought I was crazy for opening the gates so soon after all that drama, but I told him exactly what I was doing, turning transparency into armor. The event drew hundreds. Kids ran around eating ice cream, older couples walked hand in hand along the slips, and musicians played soft acoustic tunes near the lighthouse. The atmosphere was perfect, warm and human. I made sure every guest saw the same message printed on banners at the entrance: "Our marina belongs to the people who respect it." No accusations. No names. Just truth. Of course, Karen showed up. She couldn't resist an audience. I spotted her near the refreshment tent wearing sunglasses and a forced smile, pretending to blend in. She had a small camera clipped to her blouse, recording everything. I approached her slowly, making sure not to corner her. "Enjoying the event?" I asked. Her lips twitched. "I'm documenting it," she said coldly. "Public property, right?" "No," I said softly, "private event, open to the public." "Big difference." She scoffed and turned as if dismissing me, but the frustration in her shoulders gave her away. For the rest of the afternoon, she hovered on the edges of the crowd, trying to provoke someone into saying something she could twist later. But everyone was too busy enjoying themselves. There was no conflict to film, no outrage to feed on. I had taken away her oxygen. That evening, as the crowd thinned and the sunset painted the harbor in gold and violet, she finally snapped. She stormed up to me near the dock office, her camera still rolling. "You think you can manipulate everyone with your little charity stunt," she spat. "You're nothing but a fraud hiding behind your money." A few people nearby turned to watch, sensing the tension. I didn't raise my voice. "Karen," I said calmly, "you're free to leave anytime." "You humiliated me," she shouted. "You ruined my reputation, and now you're pretending to be the hero." The bitterness in her tone echoed across the dock, but instead of sympathy, all she got were tired looks. I waited until her voice cracked before speaking again. "You did this to yourself," I said. "You lied, you trespassed, you insulted people who were just doing their jobs. And when the truth came out, you called it persecution." She trembled, shaking her head furiously. "I'm the victim here," she screamed. "You're just better at pretending." The wind picked up, scattering napkins and paper cups along the pier. The last rays of light flickered on the water, turning her reflection into a warped image beside mine. "You can keep filming," I said quietly. "But sooner or later, people stop watching when the story doesn't change." She froze, realizing that no one was paying attention to her anymore. The crowd had moved on, the band had started playing again, and the world wasn't revolving around her chaos anymore. For the first time, she looked small, not from distance, but from perspective. She turned the camera off slowly, her hand shaking slightly. "You think you've won," she said through clenched teeth. "I don't win anything from this," I replied. "I just protect what's mine." Then I turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the fading light, swallowed by the sound of waves and laughter. That night, as the marina lights reflected off the calm water, Daniel joined me on the deck. "You handled that better than I would've," he said, handing me a beer. "You think she'll finally quit now?" I stared at the horizon where the last bit of color faded into blue. "No," I said. "But she's running out of stages to perform on." We sat there quietly, listening to the hum of distant engines and the soft clinking of sailboat masts. It was strange how peace could return after such chaos, like the sea pretending nothing had happened. But beneath that calm, I knew something deeper had shifted. People had seen the truth, not because I forced them to, but because Karen had exposed herself one tantrum at a time. There was no need for revenge anymore. Reality had done the work for me. 2 days later, I received an email from one of her former HOA members. It was short, polite, and surprisingly grateful. "She's moving," it read. "Listed her house this morning. The neighborhood feels lighter already." I didn't reply. I just closed the message and let the satisfaction wash over me quietly, the kind of peace that doesn't need applause. Later that evening, as I walked the docks one last time before heading home, I stopped by the spot where it all began, the ramp where she'd first screamed that my yacht was hers. The boards creaked softly beneath my feet, the same boards she once claimed belonged to the public. The moon hung low over the water, casting silver ripples across the surface. For a long while, I stood there listening to the gentle rhythm of the tide, remembering the chaos, the shouting, the absurd confidence of a woman who thought she could rewrite ownership with words alone. The morning after I found her note, the marina was unusually still, the kind of quiet that settles in after a storm has spent all its fury. The gulls circled lazily over the docks, the water glimmered in silver streaks under the first light, and the air felt fresh, rinsed clean of noise and conflict. I walked along the pier with my coffee, watching the reflection of the masts trembling gently in the water, and for the first time in what felt like months, I didn't have to brace myself for an argument or an ambush. Daniel was already at work, checking the ropes and humming a tune under his breath, his mood lighter than I had ever seen it. When he spotted me, he grinned and said, "Guess the Queen of Chaos finally abdicated." I chuckled quietly. "Seems that way." He leaned against a post and nodded toward the horizon. "Whole town's talking about her move. Apparently, she sold her house in a rush. No one's seen her since." I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the calm settle in my chest. "Good," I said. "Maybe she finally learned something." He laughed softly. "If she did, that might be the first lesson she's ever taken willingly." We spent the morning fixing a few small maintenance issues, repainting the sign at the entrance, and reorganizing the storage shed. Simple things, ordinary things, the kind of tasks that made the place feel alive again. Every so often, locals stopped by to say hello or to thank me for how I handled everything. A retired fisherman brought over a basket of oranges, saying, "You showed more patience than most of us would have." A family with 2 kids came by with cupcakes for the staff. It wasn't about victory or recognition, it was about balance returning, about people feeling safe again. The marina had become more than just a business, it was a small community, one that had weathered someone's ego and survived. By late afternoon, I found myself sitting on the deck of Horizon Tide again, staring out at the open sea. The sun dipped low, painting everything in gold, and the breeze carried the faint scent of salt and pine from the shoreline. I thought about everything that had happened, the shouting, the lies, the humiliations, the absurd spectacle she created, and it all felt distant now, like a story I'd read once but barely remembered the ending of. Yet underneath that calm, I couldn't help wondering where she was. The note she'd left me wasn't an apology exactly, but it was something close. The kind of message people write when they finally see themselves without the mirror of admiration they once depended on. Maybe she really had changed. Or maybe she was just tired of fighting battles she couldn't win. Either way, she was gone, and that was enough. As the evening fell, Daniel joined me with 2 cups of coffee and sat quietly beside me. Neither of us spoke for a while, we just listened to the rhythm of the waves brushing against the hull. Then he said, "You know, I learned something from all this." I glanced at him. "What's that?" He smirked. "Never underestimate the power of calm. You never yelled, never took the bait, and somehow that made you scarier than any shouting match could have." I smiled faintly. "Calm isn't weakness," I said. "It's control. People like her feed off reactions. When you stop reacting, they lose their grip." He nodded, staring at the water thoughtfully. "She didn't just lose the Marina," he said. "She lost her audience." That night, the town held a small summer gathering on the boardwalk. Lanterns glowed softly over the docks, and music drifted through the air. I wandered among the crowd, greeting people, shaking hands, feeling the warmth that had replaced the tension Karen once brought. A few locals brought up the story, laughing about how unbelievable it all sounded now that it was over. "I still can't believe she tried to inspect your property," one man said, nearly spilling his drink from laughter. "She really thought she could out-talk the sheriff." I smiled but said nothing. There was no satisfaction in remembering the chaos, only relief in knowing it had passed. As I looked around at the happy faces, the families, the way people moved freely through the marina without fear of being yelled at or filmed, I realized something simple but true: peace doesn't make noise. It just exists quietly, like the sea at dawn. Later, when most of the crowd had gone home and the lights shimmered across the water, I took one last walk along the dock. The night was clear, the stars sharp and endless. The only sounds were the creak of wood, the whisper of ropes, and the low hum of distant waves. I stopped at the edge of the pier where Karen had once stood shouting about ownership and entitlement, and I thought about how small that moment seemed now. All her shouting, her posturing, her false power, it had dissolved the way footprints disappear from sand after the tide comes in. The marina had outlasted her noise, and that was the quiet truth of life here. Things built with patience endure. Things built with ego sink. I reached into my pocket and took out her note again, the edges slightly worn now. I read it one last time under the moonlight before folding it neatly and slipping it into the water. It floated for a second, then vanished beneath the surface, swallowed by the current. There was something poetic about that, her final words disappearing into the same sea she once tried to claim. I stood there watching until the last ripple faded, then turned back toward the lights of the marina. Daniel was locking up the office, and the faint sound of laughter came from the staff quarters. Life was simple again. As I walked toward the gate, a soft wind came off the water, carrying the faint smell of salt and memory. I thought about how easily people forget that ownership isn't just about money or titles, it's about responsibility, respect, and the quiet dignity of stewardship. Karen had seen ownership as power, but to me, it had always been about protection. Protecting the peace, the people, the land, and the water that sustained them. Maybe that's why her world collapsed when she tried to take it. You can't steal something you don't understand. You can't control what isn't yours to begin with. When I reached the gate, I turned for one last look at Horizon Tide. The yacht gleamed faintly under the dock lights, calm and still, as if it too had been waiting for this moment of closure. The marina was silent, but it was the kind of silence that breathes, full of life and continuity. Tomorrow there would be new boats, new visitors, new stories. But this one, the story of the woman who tried to own what she couldn't comprehend, was finished. The sea had taken it, absorbed it, and smoothed it over like it always does. I smiled quietly to myself and whispered into the wind, "Let it stay that way." Then I walked through the gate, the sound of the lock clicking behind me echoing softly, not as an end, but as a promise that peace, once earned, would be guarded carefully this time.